So we're going to start lesson 2 today of chapter 2, which is over absolute values. So it's going to contain negative numbers, obviously, because we're in chapter 2, which is over negative numbers. So we can look at absolute value. And if you looked up your vocabulary definitions, you would know that absolute value is the distance of a number to 0 on a number line. So if I had 0 listed right here, and then I had a number line, and if I showed you that this was negative 10, and I said, how far is negative 10 to 0? You would simply say that negative 10 is 10 away from 0. So I could have negative 9, negative 8, negative 7, negative 6, negative 5, negative 4, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, and I get to 0, and you could count the jumps, and it would be 10 jumps away from 0. So the way that you would write that would be negative 10, and the absolute value of that number, so the absolute value of negative 10 is equal to 10, because it's 10 jumps away from 0. Okay, and if I have a positive 10, so same thing if I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and I've had 10 here, I could say that same thing is 10 jumps away from 0. Okay, so opposites on a number line, we know that negative 10 is the opposite of 10. Remember that every positive number has an opposite negative number. So the opposite is the same distance from 0 on the number line. So I would write this one as the absolute value of 10 is equal to, it's going to be the distance to 0, so it's equal to 10. Okay, you don't necessarily have to draw a number line to figure this out. So if I said I have the absolute value of negative 117, and I said, how far away is that from 0? You could draw out a number line, or you could say, well, negative 117 is 117 away from 0, so you'd just write 117, and that would be your answer. Just like if I had 1 million, whether it's positive or negative, if I put it in the absolute value symbols, that one's going to be 1 million away from 0. Okay, so you can think of that way. You can think of this in bank accounts. So you can use absolute value to interpret a gain or a loss, or if you're withdrawing a certain amount from a bank account. So if I had $100 in my bank account and I withdraw $40, and I said, how much do I have now in my bank account? That would be $60. Okay, and so I'm $60 away from 0, which you don't want to get to 0 in your bank account. I could also say, let's say I have $100 in my bank account and I have to write out a check for $150 for my electric bill. Hope we're getting paid soon, because you would never want to go below 0 in your bank account, because then you get lots of fees from the bank or they'll close your account. So 100 minus 150, in the past grades, your teachers would have told you you can't do this, but they're actually wrong. Or they were just telling you, instead of you can't do this, what they were really saying is you're not ready for this yet. So now you're ready for this. And if you have 150, you can split it into 150. Remember, that looks like a number bond again. So 100 minus 100 is 0. Then you can think of this like 0 minus 50, so you'd be at negative numbers, so it would be negative 50. Okay, so this is a negative $50 that I would have in my bank account, and that's called being overdrawn. So your bank account is negative or $50 overdrawn. So I wouldn't say I'm negative $50 overdrawn because that would be an actual like a positive amount. But when you're overdrawn, you're actually thinking of the absolute value of the negative 50, and you would say I'm $50 overdrawn. And everyone would know that that means you have a negative $50 in your bank account. Okay. We can also think of, like, if we were thinking of sea level, and let's say I had, let's say, a fish tank or something like that, and maybe I have a bottom feeder down here. I'm just going to draw a fake fish. So let's say that my fish tank is really huge, and I have that this is 5 feet below the level of water. So my level of water, let's say, is at 0 feet. We'll pretend it's like sea level. And so this would be a negative 5 feet, or it would be 5 feet below sea level. So I could say that the distance to the level of the water would be 5 feet. So if I was going to determine that, what you're actually doing is taking absolute value. So if I said it's 5 feet below, you would represent that with a negative 5. Because that's 5 feet below the level of the water. And then if I said I want to know how far it is from the distance of the level of the water, then you're saying you want to know the distance to 0. And remember, the distance to 0 is absolute value. So negative 5, the absolute value of that is 5 feet. So you would write your answer as 5 feet. Okay, so it's a basic review of absolute value. Once you do some practice problems, you'll probably catch on a little bit more when you're at the money and the actual problems. If you have questions, make sure you're asking. Once you figure out the wording, those can be a little bit easier. And then just make sure you're ordering the numbers and the temperatures correctly. So if I had like negative 50 and negative 60 and negative 58, if I was going to order these from least to greatest, so remember the least would be the furthest to the left on a number line, and the greatest would be the furthest to the right. And these are all negative. So the one that is typically thought of as a positive number that's greatest is actually going to be furthest to the left, because it would be the farthest from 0. So if I'm going to order these from least to greatest, I would order this as negative 60 is the least, and then negative 58, and then negative 50. And then if I said, okay, now add in the number negative 100, that would then go as my new least number. And then if I said add in a positive 100, that would go in as my greatest number, because remember, any number that's positive is automatically greater than all the negative numbers.